Hello and welcome to Mann's Model Moments. Yesterday we had the opportunity to see the range release for 2025 from Airfix. This time last year I felt that Airfix had a bit of a disappointing release schedule for 2024, despite nice releases like the Liberator and Chinook. We also saw the Eurofighter Typhoon starter set slip into 2025, and it seemed Airfix might be languishing in some of the larger Hornby hobby issues. With the announcement of the Lysander at Telford, it felt like Airfix was pushing against this, so yesterday was something we watched with great anticipation, so let's see what the highs and lows of this announcement were. As usual, we'll start with brand new tools. So something I've not had to do on the channel up until now, with any other manufacturer except Revell, is look at space and sci-fi. This first release is firmly grounded in reality, as Airfix give us a brand new 1/144th scale Artemis launch vehicle. This was NASA's uncrewed flight test vehicle of the Orion spacecraft, successfully launched in 2022 and performing a 25-day flight to the Moon and back. Now this is really out of left field from Airfix, and I really like where they're coming from. This is different, and it's also being sold as a gift set, so clearly directed at new modelers who perhaps haven't seen subjects that interest them available so far. The actual model is pretty big too, as you can see from its size compared to Dale in the release video, being over 70 centimeters tall. Aside from some nice CAD renders, including the final stage module which looks pretty nice, we also saw some test shot plastic, showing some really nice detail. The entire thing stands on a solid base that will be ideal for displaying it without taking up too much room too. I'm sure there will be a bunch of aftermarket and 3D printable launch towers and accessories available for this in time as well. Next up of course is the Westland Lysander. This didn't feature in the range announcement yesterday, but it is featured on the website and it is part of the 2025 range release. Of course, this was very well covered in November's announcement at Telford, so it didn't need to be in the big PR event yesterday, but I've included it to show just how much Airfix seem to be investing this year and what we are due to get, because it's quite a lot. Now probably the one that people have been waiting to hear Airfix announce for the longest time, and one of the most eagerly awaited new tools of recent years is this, the SEPECAT Jaguar. I thought they would do one last year, and I was kind of right because that was when the behind the scenes design and development was going on, but here we get it in all of its glory. Now we do see several CAD renderings of the Jaguar here, but I think the one that is the most exciting is the cockpit, which looks to be pushing the limits of what plastic can do. I'm really looking forward to seeing what the final product looks like here. There are 3 schemes included, which cover both GR1 and 1A variants, and a wide range of deployments too, and I can see fans wanting at least 2 of these kits to build either both variants or different schemes. We do also have some views of the plastic with a built-up early shot, showing some really cool details. Plenty of ordnance, a good selection of options, and weighted wheels. I think a fair few will be pre-ordering this one. Next on the new tools is a Spitfire. I await your collected groans, but this is the seminal British World War II interceptor, and companies make it because people love it. This particular iteration is a Mark 9E, brought in from November 1943 as the Mark LF 9.5, and later given the E designation. The E-wing eliminated the rifle caliber Brownings from the outer wing, retaining just 2 larger bays closer inboard for either a pair of Hispano cannons or 1 Hispano and a Browning 50 cal, a much more effective choice of guns. Like other Airfix Spitfires, this has options for both standard and clipped wings, and we get a nice choice of unusual schemes too. Moving to 1/72nd scale, we have the delayed Eurofighter Typhoon FGR4 starter set, which should be with us in the relatively near future. Look out for a full build review video on that when it comes out. Also in 1/72nd scale is this, the Westland Wessex HC2. As you guys know, I'm not a particular fan of helicopters, and the Wessex is no exception to this. But Seeing the incredible amount of detail that Airfix have put into this kit, I'm pretty sure I'll be building at least one of these. Maybe more, and the Falklands conflict immediately springs to mind. Seeing the renders, I was immediately reminded of the 1/48 scale Sea King, but this is 1/72 scale, which is kind of hard to reconcile in my mind. It immediately gives me the feeling that a 1/48 scale version of this can't be far behind, either as a surprise release later on in the year or in 2026. It has full interior detail, folding tail and rotors. I mean, wow. Of all the releases, this impressed me most, and I really hope this is successful for them because, damn, it looks good. And that's from someone who is not a fan of helicopters or this aircraft in particular. Moving to armour now, and 1/35 scale, we have another vehicle I really didn't see Airfix making, but absolutely fits their wheelhouse and makes perfect sense. This is the Stalwart Mark II, developed by Alvis from the private venture Camion vehicle, itself developed from the Salamander crash tender, which shared its suspension and drivetrain with the Saracen and Saladin. This is a classic 1960s Thunderbirds looking vehicle, which I've actually driven, and it is a lot of fun. I will of course be getting one, and it might herald the release of the related vehicles in the future. Let's keep our fingers crossed. Once again we get to see plastic here, and it looks like you get quite a lot of build options, with some really nice detail whilst avoiding photo etch parts. So let's move to kits with new parts. The first of these is described as a new mould, but of course it features a lot of commonality with Airfix's other Spitfires, despite it having some major departures. The most obvious of course is the fuselage, since this is a twin cockpit trainer. That also means new internals for the cockpits too, so this is a substantial set of changes, despite the common flying surfaces. I know many people have been asking for a twin-seat trainer version of the Spitfire for a long time, and many didn't think a manufacturer like Airfix would address it because of the variety in types, but here we have it. It's also something a bit different from your run-of-the-mill Spitfire release, so I think this is another surprising and very welcome issue. It's also nice to see some different schemes in the box, with the Irish version as the A scheme. We do get to see plastic for this one as well as the renders, which is also very welcome, and it looks like the transition from screen to reality has been very well executed. The next kit to receive new parts is the 2023 Gannet, with additional parts to make the COD4 version. This was made to ferry freight and VIPs to and from carriers, and so features some additional parts for the ferry pods, deletion of the ASW radar and so on. We only have CAD renders for this at the moment, together with 3 schemes for HMS Hermes, HMS Ark Royal, and one based out of Singapore. I think many were expecting a release with Australian and German markings, which I'm sure they will do, but that's one for the future. If you are looking for an Australian Gannet, I'll be putting my build of it up soon, so hopefully that will tide you over until an official release. Moving down to 1/72 scale, we get another 2023 release, the ME410, this time as the straight A version rather than the former U2/U4 field modifications. These new parts include bombs and external racks for its not particularly successful employment in the fighter-bomber role. We have a couple of schemes, both in a lovely RLM 74, 75, 76 scheme with mottled sides, which I'm sure will please many Luftwaffe fans. Switching to the Allies and the rather larger heavy bomber role, we have last year's B-24H reimagined as a B-24D. Although the front turret of the Liberator made the aircraft less susceptible to frontal attacks, the streamlined lines of the D make it look like a much more elegant and graceful aircraft to my eye, so this is more appealing to me than last year's release. We get a couple of very different schemes in the box, but there were also almost as many Ds made as Hs, so you can basically do what you want with this and aftermarket decals. Another 2024 release that's been updated to a different version is the Chinook, this time as the late HC-1. There is some CAD available for this model at the moment, and a couple of very different schemes, the earliest a 75th anniversary scheme in Gütersloh, and the main scheme shown on the box from Operation Granby in the First Gulf War. Coming back down to ground and bumping up to 1/35th scale, we have the Ferret Scout Car Mark 1. I said back in 2023 when this was released that a Mark 1 version should be coming, and here it is. Not only that, but looking at the schemes, including that for the main box art, you can make a Mark 1/2, as some were converted to, as well as the original Mark 1, so another reason to get a couple of these excellent kits. We now move on to kits with new decals and schemes. First up is the 1/48 scale Spitfire PR Mark 19, with 3 new schemes. The first is an aircraft used in mock dogfights with an English Electric Lightning, the second a meteorological aircraft, and the last one with the Rolls-Royce Heritage Flight. Staying with Spitfires, but this time the Mark 1, we have another 3 schemes, one based out of RAF Duxford, one in Egypt, and the last one being French and captured by the Germans in 1940. A bit more modern is the reintroduction of the Lynx, with 3 new schemes, a completely white UN version, one with the Army Air Corps in Northern Ireland, and an S4 Lynx in Croatia in the late 1990s. In 1/72nd scale we have the Focke-Wulf 190 A8/F8 with a couple of nice late war schemes from the Eastern Theatre, the first in the modern Czech Republic and the second on the Eastern Front. On the other side of the war we have the much earlier Hurricane Mark 1 with a couple of new schemes, one based in Lincolnshire and the other out of Essex. For bombers, we start with the Heinkel HE111H6, with 2 very different schemes. The first a torpedo bomber in Norway, in what I presume is RLM 72, 73, 65, and the second a standard bomber operating in the Mediterranean with a nighttime desert scheme, which make this boxing quite unusual and interesting. Likewise, for the Allied forces, we have a familiar kit with a couple more interesting and very different schemes. The first is a US aircraft operating in Italy, the second a British Fortress 3 operating out of Norfolk and in standard British heavy bomber garb. These both give very different looks to the aircraft, and I'm sure they'll find many fans of these schemes out there. We then come to reissues, which is sometimes the least interesting area of release. Not so much this year, especially as we kick off with another space release and the mighty Saturn V rocket from the Apollo program. It's been a while since this was last released, and kits on eBay can be expensive and of variable age and quality, so seeing this with the Artemis Orion is really welcome. I've certainly thought of getting one in the past, but I've always hesitated, whereas this gives me a good excuse to get on board. To match that is another space vehicle that I spent my childhood with, and thinking that it heralded the opening of space to us in a way that was never really realised, and that is the iconic Space Shuttle. As this and the other rockets are all in 1/144 scale, this also gives you a direct comparison between them and the way technology in this area has evolved over the last 60 years. Coming back to Earth and further into the past, we have the 1/48 scale Bolt & Pull Defiant. I missed this kit in Airfix's prior release, so a chance to getting again without the eBay tax is very welcome. Another one I missed the first time around is the Folland Nat T1 in 1/48 scale. This was the aircraft of the Red Arrows to me as a small child, and I always thought it was much cooler than the subsequent Hawk, so I'll probably pick this up too. In 1/72nd scale we then go back all the way to World War I, starting off with a vintage classic release of the Sopwith Pup. This is not such a rarity in the second-hand stores at model shows, the main advantage here being the decals, as the tool dates back all the way to 1973. In a similar vein is the Royal Aircraft Factory BE-2C. This has exactly the same box art of 2016 when it was a brand new tooling, and Airfix wasn't on my radar back then, so I might well try this newer version of a World War I aircraft from them. Similar to the BE-2C, the Eindecker is also a one-to-one import from when it was originally tooled in 2016. I wonder if now Airfix has a better reputation than when these were first released, they might get more traction than when they were released before. The Battle of Britain box gift set offers you 4 of Airfix's kits: the HE-111, BF-109E, Spitfire and Hurricane Mark I, plus paints, glue and brushes for £55. Given the Heinkel alone is £40 separately, this seems like really good value for a gift set, and as a memorial for the anniversary of this iconic British event. Also in that spirit of the early war is the return of the Bristol Blenheim Mark 1F. This was originally tooled in 2014, but this particular boxing for the 1F was seen in 2016. We have to go back quite a bit further to 1963 for the next release, which is the vintage classic Lockheed Hudson. The box art of this is not the original, but rather the 1973 Roy Cross version. We then stay with Roy Cross for the artwork of the next vintage classic release, the 1/72nd scale Jaguar from 1970. When new, it was the first kit of this aircraft in 1/72nd scale. An earlier Hasegawa kit of it, slated for 1969, was actually cancelled, and this kit hasn't been released by Airfix for over 20 years. It seems appropriate to be releasing it, though I can't imagine it will stand up well in the face of its modern, larger stablemate. In that vein we also have the Westland Puma, a 1973 tool that was last issued by Airfix in 1975. Now I haven't heard good things about this kit when people have managed to get one, but at least if you want to try it you won't have to be doing the rounds of eBay and second-hand stores and paying extortionate prices for it. The next on the aircraft list is the tanker version of the Victor, which I hadn't actually realised that Airfix had ever done, but this was a 2018 modification of the original 2016 B2, and that's exactly how it appears here again. The last aircraft release from Airfix this year is the 1/144th scale vintage classic Boeing Clipper, originally tooled in 1967 and featuring the original artwork from that year. Again, this hasn't been released by Airfix for 20 years, so it seems like a good opportunity if this is something that appeals. Going on to military vehicles and 1/48 scale, we have several releases which I think are very interesting. The first is the Albion 3-point refueler, a 2015 release which happened when Airfix were basically invisible to me. Next on this list of 1/48 scale vehicles is the 4x2 GS truck, another World War II vehicle used extensively by the RAF. This was tooled slightly earlier in 2014, and like the refueler, hasn't been released again since. The last of the three is then the World War II RAF ground crew set, again from 2015, released once and then not again until now. This is another one of these godsends to vignette and diorama builders. I'll definitely be getting a few of all of these for the shop and myself, as I think they're an excellent addition to the current range. Getting smaller now, we have 4 1/76 scale reissues, all from the former JB models. The first of these dates back to 1991, though this particular version was a 1993 issue, but was last released by Airfix in 2012. The second is the GS truck, tooled by JB in 1996 and last released by Airfix in 2008. The third is the 1-ton Land Rover truck, a later 1999 JB tooling, and again released by Airfix in 2008. The The fourth of the old JB toolings is the most recent, being tooled in 2002 and again released by Airfix in 2008. We then turn to the C for the last 3 reissues for this announcement, and these are all 1/72nd scale. We start with the Vosper motor torpedo boat, a 1972 tool that hasn't been issued by Airfix for almost 50 years, though MPC did release it in 1981. These are often sought after and fetch high prices on eBay and the like, so this release will help if you want to build this but aren't prepared to pay through the nose for it. Next is the RAF Rescue launch, which was a later original tool from 1978, and this will be its 8th release by Airfix, which probably points to its popularity, so I don't expect this to languish much on shelves this time around either. Finally, we have the German E-boat, a much larger 1975 tool which has only been released twice before. Once again, these fetch high prices in the second-hand market, so it's nice to see this balancing with this release. So that's Airfix's 2025 release announcement, and it's a very strong one, possibly one of the strongest since I've been doing this channel. It's no secret that I was disappointed in their January 2024 announcement, and that coincided with some poor business practices and various movements in Hornby that started to paint a pretty bleak picture of the group's future. I'm really pleased, however, that both Airfix and Hornby do seem to be trying to address some of these issues. Airfix can really only look after the horses in their own stable, and design and release of excellent kits is the main one, keeping their customer base happy whilst also expanding it to new modelers. The space releases are really welcome, not just throwing out old kits that we've seen a million times before, but also investing in the new tooling of modern subjects with the Artemis SLS system. The release of the Jaguar and a 2-seat Spitfire will both please a host of Cold War aviation enthusiasts, whereas the Stalwart and Ferret Mark I continue that recent trend Airfix have picked up for Cold War era British vehicles. I'm really crossing my fingers now for later models of the Ferret and the antecedents of the Stalwarts, the Salamander, the Saracen and Saladin. I think this is an excellent sort of beachhead for Airfix to establish themselves as a 1/35th scale vehicle model maker, which isn't easy given the likes of Tamiya, Mini Art, ICM, Ryfield, Meng and so on. Carving a niche of easy to build, detailed British Cold War armour seems ideal for the brand. I'm also astonished to hear myself say that the Wessex in 1/72nd scale was what impressed me most by this announcement. Yes, the Jaguar is fabulous and absolutely 100% Airfix, but just the sheer amount of detail and engineering in that little 1/72nd scale helicopter is astounding. If this heralds the future of Airfix, then all those dyed-in-the-wool Tamiya fanboy modelers really need to take the shoe out of their mouth and try one of these. I think a 1/48 scale version in the same vein would be a shoo-in, and I really hope that happens, though damn you Airfix and ICM for getting me interested in building helicopter models. It's also good to see Airfix capitalising on new tools quickly. We're seeing several 2023 and 2024 toolings in this release with additional parts for different versions, which is the sort of leaf out of the book of manufacturers like ICM and Edward, and I really hope that works for them. Having a B24H and a B24D, for example, is absolutely fantastic. The reissues are also very welcome. Yes, there are some in there that are a bit dubious, like the Sopwith Pup, but I really appreciate the breadth and diversity of the range this year. We have space, aviation, vehicles and boats in both military and civilian spheres, which is great to see. One last thing I'd like to take a moment to mention is the logo change too. This was done fairly quietly. There was an announcement at the beginning of the year, but it was relatively low-key and you may have missed it. Essentially, they've dropped the 3D look and drop shadow of the prior badge, and are basically using the logo from the Vintage Classics boxes, which very much goes back to the look of the old 1960s Type 4 badge. I think this has mainly been done to aid in reproduction across mediums, print of a 3D logo requires more expensive printing to look good compared to a 2D one, for example, and I can't say I have strong feelings about it one way or the other, though I'd love to know what you think. What I do really like, however, is what they've added to this for their space releases. I think this orbit with the little planets and spaceship around it is pretty cool, and it just makes them that little bit different, and again, hopefully appeal to that different audience. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what I think is a real return to form for the brand, and I'm really looking forward to what else Airfix has in store for us over the course of 2025. That's all for this instalment of Mann's Model Moments. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel for more like it, and share this video with others you think would also enjoy it. You can also follow me on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and if you're feeling generous then I also have a Patreon, which is absolutely the best way of helping me to grow the channel and produce more content like this. With that, I hope you have plenty of modelling moments of your own, and I look forward to welcoming you on the next video.